welcome back. Grab your spoon. We're back with more Remnant Stew. I'm your host, Steve.
And I'm Leah. You guys, the brain can do some really strange and odd things. And today we're going to bring you some of the craziest stories in this episode. So buckle up.
Great stories coming up.
If you have an appetite for the strange and bizarre, then pull up a chair and grab a spoon for another intriguing serving of Remnant Stew. Remnant Stew is gluten-free, organic, made from all natural, free-range ingredients, and guaranteed to provide the recommended daily serving of curiosity.
Well, you know, Leah, we're in the dog days of summer now, early August.
In Texas.
Hot. Oh, yes. It's hot and humid. But let's look at the calendar and see if maybe we have some holidays coming up to brighten our attitude from the humidity. This Wednesday, August the 4th, is Coast Guard Day. That's right. At the request of Alexander Hamilton on August the 4th, 1790, Congress approved and funded the construction of 10 vessels to protect the coast of the United States of America. I wonder if they made a song up after that, you know, there is the Coast Guard marching song.
I didn't realize the Coast Guard was really that old.
Actually, it's even a bit older than the Navy. The U.S. Coast Guard original mission was to provide coastal defense, enforce the payment of tariffs and trade laws, and stop smugglers from entering the country through the sea. Since 1790, its duties have dramatically increased, as the Coast Guard has remained the safekeepers of the United States coast. So happy Coast Guard Day out there to all of you shallow water sailors that are listening in. Now, on Monday, August the 9th, is National Book Lovers Day.
We can get behind this.
This is awesome. Right up our alley here at Remnant Stew, as we love books and we love bookstores, too. A day for those who can't live without books and reading. People love books because of their immense potential. They can transport you to new and fantastic worlds or back in time and history. They offer escapism and can make you feel many emotions at once. They are a never-ending source of education. I usually have at least 2 books going, and sometimes even more than that. I can't decide which one I'm going to pick up.
I used to be able to do that, but I can't. Nowadays, I just can't. I have to do them one at a time.
Sequentially then, right?
Right.
Well, now this Thursday, this is a really good day, I think, for many, many people that I know. Thursday, August the 12th, is National Middle Child Day.
Oh, whatever.
You know, they need their own special day.
That's right.
They're special.
Yeah, my middle child, Sam, I'm sure, is patting himself on the back just for this day. He's going to expect. Yes.
The idea to have a day to honor the middle child came from a woman named Elizabeth Walker in 1986. The day began being celebrated in the second Saturday of August, but as time went on, the celebration date became fixed on August the 12th. Walker's intention with this day was to have a national day where middle children could feel celebrated and not left out, as they often feel like they don't get enough attention, especially in larger families. If you're the parent or the sibling of a middle child, spend today treating them and giving them all of the attention they deserve. This is the perfect way to make sure that they have a very happy middle child day.
You know, here's the thing. I think middle children think that they don't get the attention and all of that. But I think that's it, that it's just something that they think. They actually require more attention.
I don't know. I was the youngest child, and I think I was pretty spoiled, frankly. But
but
I did get to spend, my brother was the middle, and I got to see him recently, and so he's one of my favorite people. Well, on to our topic of the day.
Let's dive into it.
Yeah.
Put on your thinking caps.
You know, the science of how the human brain functions is fascinating. Every year more and more is known about this last frontier of human biology. Yet as much as has been learned, there's even more that is unknown.
That's right.
So many interesting details about the way our brain functions have come about in the last 40 years or so as a result of PET scans. PET, by the way, that stands for positron emission tomography. These scans show various brain functions in different colors. You know, Leah, back in the early 1990s, from 1990 to 1992, I was actually a teacher at the Western Washington State Hospital, which is just outside of Tacoma, Washington. It was kind of a famous state hospital. There was an actress back in the 50s named Frances Farmer, who was actually a patient there for a while. Anyway, my job was to teach mentally ill adults a variety of academic and life skills. It was really interesting work.
I bet it was. I bet you have some stories.
I do have some stories, yes I do.
That you probably can't tell us.
Well, maybe for another time.
Laws.
Names and places have been left out.
It was often challenging, and at times it was sad. I had several students that had once lived really normal lives, but some type of internal or external trauma happened to them, and they found themselves struggling to function. One thing that I do remember, though, about that time was that there was a doctor at the hospital. In fact, his office was right next to mine, and he had one of the very first colorized PET scan devices, and he was using it to try to detect the source of various mental illnesses and their impact on different portions of the brain. It was really fascinating to watch. I got to sit in and watch, see the different colors and see as the person was being scanned. Well, today we're going to discuss some people who demonstrate quite unusual brain activity, which can result in a remarkable variety of effects. We'll start with an examination of people who never forget anything.
Well, before we do that, let's talk about some surprising things about actual normal memory. So we tend to think of memories as something concrete and tangible, kind of like a scrapbook. Like you have this library in your head of scrapbooks of different memories.
Right.
Like, for instance, your 10th birthday.
Correct.
And so you might pull it down and look at it and remember, your best friend was being silly, making everyone laugh.
Right.
You got a green and black bike, headlights, a headlight on the bike or whatever. And memory is actually more like something made of soft clay. When you pull it down and you examine it and you look at it, you actually make changes to it at that point.
You alter it.
You do alter it. And so you may have had a conversation with some buddies lately that were talking about having pegs on their bikes. Do you even know what that is?
Right. I've heard about that.
Yeah.
Okay, 'cause it wasn't a thing when I was a kid, but my boys had them on the spokes. They're like pipes where somebody can stand on the back. And so you talk about that, and then the next time that you access that 10th birthday memory, you might picture pegs on that bike, even though you didn't have it on that bike, maybe a later bike or something. Anyway, the memory changes over time. And so you're not really, when you pull down a memory and you look at it, you're not really remembering that day from when you were 10 years old.
Right.
You're remembering that last time that you remembered it, if that makes sense.
Right.
It's always changing. And so let's say your best friend that you grew up with, this kid that was making so much, being silly.
Right.
Let's say he grew up, your wife cheated on you with him. Okay, he kicked your dog and he made you lose your job. You decided that you really didn't like this guy. So the next time you think about your 10th birthday,
that's a bad memory there.
That memory's changed, and you're like, oh yeah, he was just being silly. He was always jealous, and he was trying to be the center.
He was
of
a jerk back then.
And
I just didn't see it. Yeah,
that's right. So those memories change. They change with the different things that
your perspectives.
Your perspective and the different things that it's really funny how malleable they are. And how unreliable memories can be.
That's true, too. And I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but something that a memory that you were certain was a certain way, and then you found out later really wasn't that way.
But you can play it in your head like a
Exactly.
videotape.
Exactly.
And you can see it. It was totally that way. And and then you find out it was completely different.
I've been a teacher for a long time now, and I can remember the names of all my students, but I can't pull them up when I see them. They're all in there somewhere. But if I see a student from a previous year, I know their brain, their name is in my brain somewhere, but I can't find it. I tell them that my brain is kind of like an old filing cabinet with drawers hanging open and files messed around and hanging askew.
It's in the other
cabinet. Not always alphabetically ordered and everything. Well, talking about though people who never forget, there are some that have an unusual condition. This comes from a terrific article on bbc.com/future, and the article is called "The Blessing and Curse of the People Who Never Forget." It was written by a gentleman named David Robson, and we are very grateful that Mr. Robson has granted us permission to quote his article directly. So thank you very much, David Robson. For most of us, as we were saying, memory is kind of a scrapbook, a mess of blurred and faded snapshots of our lives. As much as we would like to cling on to our past, even the most poignant moments can be washed away with time. However, ask, and I'm going to mess up this name, I'm afraid, Nima, N-I-M-A, V-E-I-S-E-H, let's call it Visay, Nima Visay, what he was doing on any day in the past 20 years, and he will be able to give you the minutia of the weather, what he was wearing, or even what side of the train he was sitting on his journey to work.
That's crazy.
He says, my memory is like a library of VHS tapes, walkthroughs of every day of my life from waking to sleeping, he explains. Visay can even put a date on when those reels started recording, December 15th, 2000, when he met his first girlfriend at his best friend's 16th birthday party. He had always had a good memory, but the thrill of young love seems to have shifted a gear in his mind.
To remember everything.
Exactly. From then on, he could start recording his whole life in detail. Again, he's quoted as saying, I could tell you everything about every day after that. Needless to say, people like Visay are of great interest to neuroscientists hoping to understand the way that the brain records our lives. The phenomenon is called highly superior autobiographical memory. Highly superior autobiographical memory, or we'll just use the abbreviations HSAM for short. It first came to light in the early 2000s with a young woman named Jill Price. She emailed a neuroscientist and memory researcher named Jim McGaw one day, and she claimed that she could recall every day of her life since the age 12. He asked could she help explain her experience. Well, he was intrigued by this, and he invited her to his lab, and he began to test her. He would give her a date and ask her to tell him about the world events on that day. True to her word, she was correct almost every time. Luckily, she'd also kept a diary of her life during that period, allowing the researchers to verify her recollections of personal incidents, too. And again, she was right the vast majority of the time. When they would pick a date and say, what happened on November 4th, 1996? She would be able to tell them both world events and in her own life.
Wow. See, and I think keeping a diary probably was kind of key.
Right.
Because the more you think back on memories, like you lose the memories that you don't think back on.
Right.
And as you do think back on certain days, or, you know, to us,
sure,
certain days, I guess to her every day, then you strengthen those connections, those synapses.
Synapses, right. And as I tell my students, when you write things down, you remember them better anyway.
Right.
As magazines and media began to document Jill's case, several dozen other HSAM people also presented themselves to researchers in the United States and in the UK. They were tested on a wide variety of date-specific information. Visay, the gentleman that we mentioned earlier, even corrected researchers on the date that Michael Phelps won his 8th gold medal during the 2008 Olympic Games. They had the wrong date. He said, no, it was this day.
I don't think Michael Phelps could tell you that.
Probably not.
He's got so many gold medals. It's like, I don't remember.
Interestingly, researchers found that those with HSAM could remember life events in extraordinary detail, yet they seem to be no better than average at recalling impersonal information, such as random lists of words. As mentioned earlier, PET scans have been very helpful in advancing research on brain function. However, individuals with HSAM don't appear to have any detectable difference in their brains other than ordinary folks. It's not like they have some extra lobe or a third hemisphere of the brain, explained one researcher. Instead, the key seems to be in more general thinking patterns and habits. Dr. Lawrence Pathis is a researcher at the University of Southern Mississippi. He recently profiled around 20 people with HSAM, and he found that they scored particularly high on two measures. One was fantasy proneness, and the other one is absorption.
Okay, that's interesting. Fantasy proneness.
Right. Fantasy proneness refers to a tendency to imagine and daydream.
Okay.
Okay.
You would think those would be more absent-minded people. That kind of is what I am. Anyway.
Yeah.
Whereas absorption is the tendency to allow your mind to become completely immersed in an activity. This absorption helps them to establish strong foundations for recollection, says Pathis. And the fantasy proneness means that they revisit those memories again and again in the coming weeks and months. Each time this initial memory trace is replayed, it becomes even stronger in some ways.
Yeah.
Now, you probably go through this same process after a big event like your wedding, but the difference is that thanks to their other psychological tendencies, the HSAM subjects are doing it day in, day out, every day for their entire lives.
Wow.
Really interesting.
Exhausting.
Yeah. See, I would like to have a better memory, but I'm not so sure.
I think I want to remember everything.
And I guess that's why they called
day.
it a blessing and a curse.
Right.
Well, that's kind of what they're saying. It says the people with HSAM generally agree that it can be a mixed blessing. On the plus side, it allows you to relive the most transformative and enriching experiences that you've had in your life. Visay, for example, is an art lover, and he has visited art museums all over the world. Here's a quote from him. He says, "Imagine being able to remember every painting on every wall in every gallery space between nearly 40 countries," he says.
Wow.
That's a big education in art by itself. You know, when I go to art galleries, pretty soon they all kind of start looking alike to me. It's almost wasted on me. But he can distinctly remember every painting that he's ever seen. On the other hand, viewing the past in high definition can also make it very difficult to get over pain and regret.
Oh, I bet.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It can be really hard to forget embarrassing moments, said one participant. You feel the same emotion. It's just as raw, just as fresh. You can't turn off that stream of memories. This means they often have to make special effort to lay the past to rest. And again, Mr. Visay says, some say forgive and forget, but since forgetting is a luxury I don't have, I need to learn to genuinely forgive, and not just others, but also myself. So really interesting that the memories are so strong, even the things you don't want to remember, it's more difficult for them to get past.
Wow.
Consistent forgiveness. Wow.
Right. Now, along that same path is the amazing story of Stephen Wiltshire. This comes from, actually part of it from his website, but also from the National Geographic. Stephen is spelled with a PH, I'm sorry. His
Stephen.
Website is Stephen, StephenWiltshire.co.uk. Stephen Wiltshire was born in London, UK in 1974. His parents, who were from the West Indies, became concerned as he didn't develop any language skills, and he tended to live completely within himself. At age 3, he was diagnosed as autistic. When he was 5, his parents enrolled him into the Queen's Mill School in London. He still was not speaking, but the teachers soon noticed that he loved to draw and that his artwork was unusual and accurately detailed. In an effort to force him to speak, the staff removed his art supplies from him until he would ask for them. After a few brief stutters, he said his first word, paper. Stephen would not become fully conversational until he reached age 9, but his artwork continued to dazzle everyone who encountered him. At first, he drew animals, then London buses, those double-decker buses. Then he was fascinated with American cars, and he finally became very accurate at detailing buildings. His detailed drawings of buildings gained notice as local media ran features on the young boy's skill. When he was 8 years old, he sold his first drawing to none other than the British Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher. She was the first one to buy one of his drawings. Well, one day, his older sister took him to visit a family friend who lived on the 14th floor of an apartment building, and there he could see an overhead view of the city. He was fascinated by the layout of the streets and the recognizable buildings and monuments. From that point on, says his sister Annette, his passion became obsessive. He began sketching cityscapes almost continually. And what really makes this remarkable is that Stephen has the ability to remember and copy the layout of an entire city after just a brief glance. Cool. Recently, he took a 20-minute helicopter ride over New York City, and then he produced a 19-foot-long drawing of the city done completely from memory. The drawing is incredibly detailed, including hundreds of streets, buildings, parks, and other features, all drawn perfectly to scale. While he was doing this, they had a live webcam set up, and people could actually watch him as he was doing his drawing. He's produced amazing panoramas of cities all over the world. While in New York, he met the famed neurologist Oliver Sacks, and he drew a perfect replica of his house after taking a quick glance at it. Sacks wrote the following foreword for a book displaying Stephen's work, and this is a quote from Dr. Sacks. He says, "The combination of great abilities and great disabilities presents an extraordinary paradox. How can such opposites live side by side?" Really fascinating. Now, one kind of humorous thing about Stephen is while he was in New York City, he actually got lost for 45 minutes while he was walking around. If you go to visit London, you will find his drawings in Heathrow Airport greeting you.
Oh, wow.
And I probably shouldn't even mention this without having looked it up, but I wanted to say that Washington, D.C. was laid out by an architect, and the plans were lost, and then the architect did it back again.
Oh, just from his
memory. Yeah, I don't know. I'm sorry.
I think you might be. I think I've heard that too. Yeah.
Now for today's bookshop spot, the part of the show where we take you on a virtual tour of one of the most magical of places, an independent bookshop.
Okay, so for today's bookshop spot, we have a bookshop called Page Turners.
That's a great name for a bookshop.
I know, I love it.
Awesome.
I love it. Located in Iowa at 101 East Salem Avenue. That's on the southwest corner of the town square in Indianola.
Indianola, okay.
Which is also the home, this is really cool, of the National Balloon Museum.
Wow, two things at once to do in Indianola, Iowa, right?
And Indianola hosts the National Balloon Classic, a 9-day annual hot air balloon festival held in the summer.
So that is a lot of hot air.
Oh.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So Page Turner's bookstore specializes in rare, collectible, and vintage books, as well as new and used books, puzzles, journals, jewelry, cards, and they host readings and signings, book clubs, and all of that. Kathy Magruder is the owner and has worked in bookstores since 1995, holds a master's degree in English Lit, and would rather read than do almost anything
I bet
else.
she's real helpful, though, in helping you find what you're looking for.
Well, listen, she opened Page Turner's bookstore in 2014, and she says, "All of us who work here are book lovers. We would rather talk books than do almost anything else. A customer asked me today, 'Don't you ever get tired of talking about books?' And no, we never get tired of that."
Yay, Kathy.
Page Turner's bookstore was created to be, she continues to say, that the bookstore was created to be a part of a community of readers.
Right.
We are very proud of our selection of new and used books. Yes, we sell used books and we buy used books. We also accept donations. Our new books are some of the best out there, chosen by people who really love to read. And if we don't have what you're looking for, we'll order it for you.
Right.
She says, "We are all book addicts and would love to suggest a great book, and we also love to get suggestions." And one cool thing Kathy shared about the bookstore's building is that it stands on land originally owned by a man named Moy Sing Bo, born in China in 1864. And in the 1880s, Bo built a Chinese laundry on the site and installed a heating plant next to the laundry and piped steam heat underground up the block, heating
Interesting.
all of the stores on the block. And the crawl space still exists. I'm like,
wow.
Wine cellar, that's
Yeah,
what I'm
right.
do with it. But you can, so if you are in Indianola for the
Indianola,
Balloon
Iowa,
Fest, yeah,
right?
for the Balloon Festival or whatever, check out the store. It sounds like a really cool place. But if you can't get that way, check them out online at Page Turner's Bookstore. And there's bookstore.com. And they are also on Facebook and Instagram.
Here's an unrelated note. I went to high school with a girl who was named Paige Turner.
Oh, really? Well, did she turn out to be a journalist?
I don't know where she is today.
Because I know of a journalist named Paige Turner. I was pretty
Maybe that is her.
sure
That
that
could
was
be.
a non-diplume. But
And now for something really smashing.
Well, now back to our topic at hand.
a regularly scheduled program.
Our regularly scheduled chinwag, as our British cousin says.
Don't worry, it'll get put in there.
From those who remember everything, we're going to transition to those who have specific memory deficits. This comes to us from Helix Magazine, which is a publication of Northwestern University.
Wait, what are we talking about?
This one's called Prosopagnosia.
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 Isn't that what he said?
It's Prosopagnosia. And what, you may ask, is prosopagnosia? Well, it's commonly referred to as face blindness.
That's a lot easier to say.
Right? It is the inability to recognize a person by looking at their face. Remarkably, 1 in every 50 people in the United States has some degree of prosopagnosia.
That's surprising to me.
Isn't it, though? Imagine looking directly at a person's face. You take in their features such as hairline, eyes, eyebrows, ears, nose, and lips. You'd know that you were looking at a face, but if you had prosopagnosia, you wouldn't be able to match that specific face with any other face you had seen before. As a result, you couldn't identify the person. You might not be able to recognize your family members despite seeing them every day.
Oh, wow.
If you were talking to someone and they turned their head slightly, you might think you were suddenly talking to a different person, one you have never seen before. There are even severe cases in which you wouldn't even recognize your own reflection. This is a really good article. It's written by a person named Austin Lin, L-I-N. It's titled Face Blindness in a Nutshell, Putting a Human Face on Prosopagnosia. It's a great read. Lin details the work of artist and photographer Chuck Close, whose renowned mosaics and paintings all focus on the human face. Ironically, Chuck Close himself was born with prosopagnosia.
Oh, wow.
All of his artwork has to do with the face, and we've included one, I think, that we can put on our website.
So he painted the same face as a new face every time?
I don't know. Before detailing the probable cause of prosopagnosia, Lynn first details or identifies what is not the cause. People with face blindness don't have abnormal vision. Their visual perception is not particularly worse or better than average, and generally, they can see just as well as any other person. They can differentiate shades of colors, identify visual patterns, and see in 3D. They can distinguish objects from other objects, and they can find their car in the parking lot. They don't
That's always a good.
Yeah,
that's better
that's
than
always helpful.
me because I put stickers on my car just because I kept walking right past it.
They don't have a deficit of overall intelligence. They can remember names and specific facts about a person after meeting them. They don't have any problem seeing or learning or remembering, but they just can't recognize faces. Again, PET scans have given us some answers here, as they've shown that our brains process the memory of faces with different neural connections than it does with ordinary objects. This function is performed in the region of the brain called the fusiform face area and is tucked deeply in the temporal lobe at the base of the brain. This facial information is then connected with data from other areas of our brain to give us the complete message of who the person is that we are seeing. One theory is that our early ancestors may have utilized this trait as a way to recognize the difference between friends and enemies. You know, for early people, the human body in a distance looks kind of the same. So, you know, you get more specialized in recognizing faces that took a different part of the brain. So you actually, a different part of your brain is involved in recognizing faces.
Yeah, like a deeper, more primordial part of our brain. It was very much related to survival.
Exactly.
The survival part of it.
However, people with prosopagnosia appear to have some deficit in their fusiform facial region. Some are born with it, and others may develop it as a result of a brain injury, such as a stroke. As a result, they simply cannot recognize faces, even those of people who are very close to them. Now, among the 2% of the United States population to have prosopagnosia, there are some well-known people that you may have heard of. Actor Brad Pitt. People have accused him of being a snob when he walks past someone on set and doesn't recognize them, despite having had many conversations with them the previous day. So that would be kind of unfortunate.
So you're always meeting someone new.
Oh, it seems like it. You've heard of the wonderful anthropologist Jane Goodall, who did all of her work with with
the
apes, right? But she also had prosopagnosia. Well, she avoided social discomfort by pretending to remember everyone she met. Of course, the Apple co-founder, Steve Wozniak, very brilliant person, but he also had prosopagnosia, and he was noted as saying, to me, faces just aren't that important.
Oh, wow. So, okay, the opposite of that, it would be pareidolia. Pareidolia. That's it. Most people have this, okay? And it's what causes us to see faces,
right? Bodies
or animals in inanimate objects.
Oh, see faces in other things.
That's right. So like that's what happens when you look up in the clouds and you see an alligator or an elephant or whatever,
right?
Or a face in the texture of the ceiling, a man in the grain wood of a door, or when you see the man in the moon.
Right.
It was at one time considered a symptom of psychosis. Did you know that?
Really?
I was going to ask on the previous one.
And I'm like,
did they ever consider that one like amnesia, or not even just amnesia, but
yeah?
I think it's brain damage. It's physical
like that,
damage to the brain rather than than something developed because of abuse or something. Yeah.
But was it ever considered? Possibly. I don't know. Why can't you remember me? Is something wrong with you?
Well, here's a fun fact. So while it was considered at one time a symptom of psychosis, which is crazy because everybody does this.
Right.
Everybody does this. Now it's seen as a normal human tendency. But it's cited as the reason, and I'm trying to avoid saying the word again, but it's Pareidolia. Pareidolia is cited as the reason people see the image of Jesus in a grilled cheese sandwich.
I remember that.
or in a water-stained ceiling.
Green chill sandwiches are holy already.
Or tortillas,
Yeah, that's even holier.
Tortilla.
It's like their levels.
Oh, goodness.
As we digest, we keep going, right?
We just keep going.
And now for something completely off topic and off kilter. Brace yourself for the oddity du jour.
Okay, so for today's oddity, let's talk about dum-dums.
Hey, is that me and Phil?
I recognize this post.
Resemble that remark.
We're not being mean and talking about people, but the candy.
Oh, okay.
The lollipop.
Okay, so it's not Pareidolia anymore.
Dum-dums were developed by the Akron Candy Company in Ohio. The sales manager at the time called them dum-dums because he knew Phil, and he thought it was because he
give
thought
me dum-dums, yum-yum. Oh wait, no, give me
gum dum. That's right.
I love that movie.
Okay, back to the topic. They were colorful, and the reason he called them that is because he thought it was a phrase that could be easily uttered by small children.
Oh yeah, no, sure, yeah, for sure.
For sure, yeah, absolutely.
I recognize. I use it every day.
Right.
Okay, so they're simple, colorful, and cheap. And I did a Google search, and I couldn't tell if this was just purely an American candy or if they were distributed further than America or whatever.
We'll have to have our overseas people chime in here and tell us if you can get dum-dums where you are.
But these are, if you don't know what dum-dums are, they're colorful, little, tiny, they're kind of tiny lollipops. And they're cheap and apparently stood the test of time because they're still enjoyed by kids of all ages today. My kids, it's interesting because there's very few associations that my kids have that I also had as a kid.
Right.
And dum-dums is one of those because my kids associate it with the doctor, with getting shots, and also Halloween. They got it in their Halloween bags when they went trick-or-treating, and I did the same. It was kind of cool. So over the years, additional flavors were added, like buttered popcorn, cotton candy, and bubblegum. In 2006, the company and the company Spangler Candy, bought out Dum-Dums. It started as the Akron Candy Company, but Spangler, and you might know Spangler, and I'm sorry if anybody works for Spangler. They have Necco wafers. Do you remember those?
I remember those.
Those are like chalk. It's like flavored chalk. And they also have circus peanuts.
Okay, I remember those too.
Yeah, those are disgusting. Anyway, so okay,
they were not there. They weren't high on my list. But
Dum-Dums are really good. They have a lot of different flavors, and in my humble opinion, pineapple is the best. But have you ever noticed that they have the mystery flavor? Have
No.
you ever come across one of those?
Where you have no idea what you're tasting.
What it
Yeah,
is?
well,
Pretty good.
okay, so
I
you
think I
can
have
tell
seen that,
what
yeah.
flavor
Mentioned.
it is because the wrapping tells you, and
Yeah.
it's blue or
Right.
it's color
Root beer or
coded,
whatever,
and
yeah.
then it also says it on the wrapper what it is. But then there's mystery flavor. And so if you've ever tried to figure out what that is, you may have figured it out,
Yeah, you may
but
not.
it's not always the same flavor. All the mystery
Oh,
flavors
they're
are
always
not the
tricking
same.
you. They're always switching up, huh?
Because what happened was it's nothing more than when they change batches. Instead of shutting down the equipment and cleaning the flavoring out of the equipment, cleaning all of the stuff and starting a new flavor, they just run a new flavor.
Oh, so
And
you get a
the
mixture
candies-
old and new.
That's right. The candies that are in between and get a mixture of the old batch and the new batch.
So
They should just
so-
call it slothfulness.
or suicide. I mean,
Well-
and that's what you do with the drinks. You just start going down the list of all
Oh,
of them,
Yeah.
mix them all together.
So all the flavors that they have, mystery flavor is a mixture of two of them.
At least, yeah.
And then, and so that's what the mystery is. And
All
did
right.
you know, and so one last little tidbit. Did you know that you can buy Dum Dums just one flavor? If you go to spanglercandy.com, you can buy it like just the blueberry or just the cherry or just
the pineapple.
in case you need to, just the pineapple. In case you need to color code it for like your wedding reception.
Right. That would be great. That would be fun.
Or
Yeah,
you're
to
or
match
you're
the
just
colors of
that
the wedding.
OCD. You need just a
I just need
specific color.
pineapple.
By the way,
right?
Spangler, if you're looking for a podcast to sponsor, we'd love to talk with you.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's get back to our stories about the brain. The following items comes to us from an article on listverse.com called 10 Strange Stories About the Human Brain, written by Nolan Moore. While all 10 are interesting, we're going to focus on just 3 of these. The first one concerns perhaps one of the most famous brains of all time, Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein was one of the greatest thinkers ever. Such was the nature of his genius that many people have wondered if his brain had some extraordinary features. Pathologist Thomas Harvey decided to try to find out, even if it meant bursting through medical and ethical protocol.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan
This is
of
not
the
gonna end
story.
well.
Yeah, Harvey's not a great guy. Before his death in 1955, Einstein stipulated that his remains were to be cremated. He didn't want his grave to become a weird hangout for postgraduate calculus students who would continuously chant his theory of relativity over and over ad nauseum. E equals MC squared.
Dum
E
dum.
equals MC squared.
Oh, listen, did he say that or did you just come up with that?
Well, it was actually in the part of the article. So
Great quote.
So that thus his directive to have his entire body cremated. However, Thomas Harvey didn't care about that, claiming that he had permission from Princeton Hospital, which he did not have.
Ooh.
Harvey removed Einstein's brain during the autopsy. What a guy.
Nice.
Harvey
he
convinced
got
Einstein's
sneaky.
son to okay the operation, claiming that his dad's brain needed to be studied for science. When university authorities learned what he had done, they demanded that he return the brain. He refused, and they fired him.
Imagine that.
He then
Can
snuck
you
out.
imagine explaining why you were fired to somebody else? Well,
For-
Yeah,
he
well,
stole
they kinda stole
Einstein's
him.
brain.
It kind of took it from him.
Right.
wow.
So then he snuck out of the hospital, drove to Philadelphia, where he hired a technician to slice Einstein's brain
Wait.
200 cubes.
Wait. He snuck out of the hospital with the brain?
With the brain, yeah. Got out with the brain.
Hey, let me just pack up my things.
Right. You're fired out of here in his cardboard box as he was carrying him out.
I
Was
love
Einstein's brain
that. I
that he
love
had
that
taken
sound
out.
effect.
Right.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So anyway, the brain was cut up into 200 different little cubes. Over the next 40 years, the little squares ended up in the weirdest places. Harvey stored them in jars in his basement, where his wife almost threw them out by accident.
Oh.
You remember we had one of our earliest episodes. We had a doctor in Florida that had a
the
bunch of
tongue.
The
tongues
tongues
stored.
under the
Yeah.
floorboards.
Honey, what's in this jar?
Floorboards.
Don't worry. It's Einstein's brain. But it's in a
my
cube.
goodness.
Well, yeah, it's
Oh,
cubed
wow,
up.
this is
So this
Yeah.
doc was definitely square.
Anyway, he then moved to
Phil.
Kansas, where he kept them in a box under a beer cooler, so at least that was a little bit safer, perhaps. Then he mailed pieces of Einstein's brain to various researchers, but most of them were not interested in studying a tiny cube of brain. A few who did turned out to be quacks, and their findings were discredited.
because
Harvey-
doctors that would receive that kind of package.
Right.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Harvey eventually returned to the brain pieces to Princeton Hospital. He died in 2007. I think perhaps more interesting study would have been to dissect
His
Harvey's
brain.
brain just to see what
Right.
the world he was thinking when he decided that was a good idea. So unfortunately, Einstein's brain had a circuitous route before it got back to where it started. Now, here's another interesting story about a fellow named John Sarkin. It's Jon Sarkin. And in addition to the listserv, is it listserv or listverse? I said it wrong earlier. I also got some information from his own website, jsarkin.com. John Sarkin is a 35-year-old chiropractor. One day in 1988, while playing golf, something strange happened inside his head. A blood vessel started moving and eventually pressed against his auditory nerve, causing an almost deafening case of tinnitus, or ringing in the ears.
Oh, wow.
Seeking treatment for this irritation, he met a surgeon who suggested a radical treatment. The procedure was to separate the nerve and the blood vessel with a piece of Teflon.
Okay.
You know, let's just stick some Teflon in there. That'll fix her.
We'll just wrap this right up.
Right.
Oh.
Instead, unfortunately, the surgery caused a cerebellar hemorrhage, which then triggered a massive stroke. As a result, the surgeon had to cut a piece from the left side of John's brain. When he woke up a week later, he found that a part of his brain was missing. He was deaf in one ear, his vision was splintered, and his balance permanently skewed. And he had undergone a significant personality change.
Wow, what
Whoa.
a botched surgery.
Yeah, for sure. Now, one of the most notable aspects, though, of his new self was that he had an insatiable desire to draw. He immediately began drawing, doodling, and sketching unusual shapes. Eventually, he was able to return to his old chiropractic practice. However, he filled up his time between patients by sketching. Even during dinner, he would put down his fork and pick up his pen and draw on the napkin. It turned out that John was experiencing a bizarre condition called sudden artistic output, which is so rare that doctors have only recorded 3 cases caused by brain injury. The remaining neurons from the damaged part of his brain made new connections, and the sudden artistic output is the result of those new connections. This brain injury would make most starving artists green with envy. In 1993, Sarkin sold 8 of his pictures to the New Yorker magazine. He quit his chiropractic practice and he opened an art studio.
Oh, cool.
Since then, John's work has appeared in numerous media, including the New York Times, the Boston Globe, and on ABC News. His story was purchased by Tom Cruise's production company, and he was the subject of a book written by a Pulitzer Prize-winning author. If you want to buy one of his pieces, you got to shell out about $10,000 per canvas. So as far as stroke side effects go, this one has turned out to be pretty profitable.
So,
Good for
so is
him.
it by size? Because what does the napkin size cost?
I don't know. But
Just a
interesting
little sketch on
website.
it.
If you go to jsarkin.com, Sarkin. Hey, is this noise coming through from the rain? It's raining outside.
Yeah, well, I think it'll be just
It's
fine.
probably,
We're okay.
But it
it's
is
probably by
pouring here.
air. It's
If
gonna
you hear some
sound like-
background noise, we're having a thunderstorm here in the greater Cut and Shoot area.
Yes.
Well, so anyway, very interesting about John Sarkin.
Okay, so this next story is actually the story that made me want to do an episode on this. It's called Sarah and the Spider Woman. So I recently listened to a podcast episode of Astonishing Legends that featured a guest who had quite an experience that I'm going to share with you. First, I have to tell you that I love the Astonishing Legends podcast and hosts Scott and Forrest.
Yay, Scott
They
and
have,
Forrest.
yeah, hey there, guys. They have no idea that I'm promoting their podcast, but you should really give it a listen.
Hey, listen to them.
A great place to start would be the episode called Sarah and the Spider Woman. It is, it's over an hour long, and I'm just gonna boil it down to just a few minutes for you. So according to their website on their description on their episode, I quote, "When people see horrific apparitions of a supernatural nature, what are they really seeing, and what could be causing these images to appear? Could it be that the demons and terrors some people have witnessed sometimes come from a strange symptom of a rare medical condition? This seems to have been the case with tonight's guest, Sarah, who was seeing things and elements more associated with demonic possession, a haunting, or even a psychological disorder, rather than with a physiological illness. It might seem easy to say all these supernatural occurrences are nothing but a byproduct of medical ailment, but many people have also reported seeing and interacting with horrific specters similar to what Sarah was seeing, who have no medical issues. So we're left then to wonder, then on a case-by-case basis, if seeing something supernatural is from a medical cause, a spiritual cause, or perhaps a combination of both. So to delve into Sarah's story, again, like I said before, the podcast episode is lengthy, but I'm going to boil it down.
We'll summarize it for you.
The guest, Sarah, she was identified only by her first name, was in her early 20s in 2015 when these events took place. She was living and working in the UK and traveling quite a bit for her job when she started noticing some weird things happening to her. You said about the golfer that all of a sudden he developed tinnitus. Okay, so it started for her as a very simple case of tinnitus.
Right.
She said it sounded like a heartbeat, but then it was very fast and fluttering in her ear, so it sounded it became more like a hummingbird. She said it sounded like a hummingbird was just right by her ear.
It'd be disturbing, wouldn't it, all of a sudden?
Well, disturbing, a little bit. And she was going to for all of these symptoms, she was seeing doctors about it. So it was annoying, but it wasn't that big of a deal. But then she started seeing things out of the corner of her eye. Dark, scrambling things that she thought were bugs or even mice. She could never quite catch a full-on sighting. They were always in her peripheral vision. Right. So things ramped up as she started hearing her name spoken to her and hearing conversations like someone had left the radio on. She kept checking her phone to see if there was YouTube video, something playing in the background. And all to no avail. She just kept hearing these things. So she had her hearing tested, her eyes tested, and the results all came back normal. And that's when she started seeing the hands.
Oh.
Sarah was in a hotel room when she saw the first hand. She was startled to see a hand coming out from under a piece of furniture. I think she said it was a wardrobe. She jumped up on the bed, as you would be really freaked out about this, and she just stared at it, trying to make sense of the hand, trying to see if it would move. And eventually she realized that what she was seeing could not be real. And she managed to screw up the courage to get off the bed and investigate it, and the hand was gone.
Right.
But in the week that Sarah was at that hotel, she kept seeing more and more hands. Visions, hallucinations. She knew that they weren't there.
Couldn't be real, right?
Right, and so even though she's having these hallucinations, she is realizing that they aren't real.
They can certainly seem real, but they were not real.
That's right. And in one case, the hands actually tried to grab her.
Uh-huh.
So at this time, the black scurrying things became bigger, and when Sarah would see them on the side of the road when she was driving, she decided it was time to stop driving.
Oh, wow.
And then that made her, she had to quit her job. So, because she was afraid that one of them would run in front of her and she would slam on her brakes, even though she knew it wasn't real, but...
Your reaction would be...
itself, yeah.
And so she decided it was just too dangerous, and so she had to move back in with her parents. All this time, Sarah's doctor became convinced that she needed antipsychotic medication.
Oh.
Sarah, who had some education in psychology, she disagreed because she did realize that they were not real.
Right.
She wasn't paranoid, and so she changed doctors. She got second opinion, third opinion, fourth opinion. She went to many different doctors she was worried about a tumor.
Right.
She was worried about it. She got an MRI to rule out a tumor, and she was convinced that her problems were medical, not psychological.
Uh-huh.
So she continued trying to find a doctor to find the source of this.
Right.
She was diagnosed with depression and then anxiety, and those medications did nothing to help this situation. And in the meantime, her hallucinations were getting even worse. They were getting scarier. Without a job, and like I said, without a job and not being able to drive, she had to move back in with her parents, and their home was 2 stories. And it seemed like some of these hallucinations were located in certain areas of the house.
Right.
So on the landing of the stairs went up, turned, and went back and went up. So there's a landing in the middle. There was a woman that would stand on the landing of the stairs just staring at her.
An old woman, yeah.
Yeah, an old woman, that had jagged spider legs coming out of her back. And Sarah would like she knew she wasn't there. She would throw things down at her and they would go through her, but she couldn't bring herself to walk through the lady. And in the living room was a man that she called a fish man. His head was that of an angler fish with a little light dangling in front of his face and rows of overlapping sharp teeth. And so she describes
terrifying
sitting there.
Situation,
Yeah, she describes sitting there trying to have a conversation with her family. They're all in there, and no one sees this man, but he's right there staring at her. She just described them as if you were going through a haunted house. You know it's not real, but you still react. There were other horrific apparitions as well, which earned Sarah the diagnosis of a psychotic break, possible epilepsy, and finally with schizoaffective disorder. The doctors wanted Sarah to take antipsychotic meds, which she refused to do. She was just absolutely sure she was not mentally ill because she wasn't just delusional. She
knew they weren't real, but she was still seeing them.
She had nothing against, taking the medications if she felt like she was, but she wasn't. And she knew that by taking these, she would be dependent on her parents from then on out. So about this time, Sarah heard about the case of Susanna Cahalan. I want to always call it Callahan, but it's Cahalan or Cahalan, whose bout with a serious illness prompted her to write a memoir called Brain on Fire that was then adapted into a movie by the same name. Sarah identified with a lot of what Susanna had gone through and her struggles with doctors thinking she was psychotic when all along her problem turned out to be encephalitis. Which is a swelling of the brain. A physical problem, not a mental one. Now, Susanna just went totally downhill and was eventually comatose before she was diagnosed. Sarah didn't think this wasn't Sarah's problem, but she gained hope from the fact that it was a medical issue and not a psychological one. So she continued to search. And finally, she came across several articles in which patients were battling the exact same things Sarah was experiencing, and their problems turned out to be hyperthyroidism.
Hyperthyroidism.
Oh, wow.
Now, a lot of women, me and I'm included in that, suffer from hypo, where your thyroid doesn't produce enough hormone. But this was the other direction, where her thyroid was going crazy. So Sarah printed out a bunch of these reports, took them to her doctor, who just didn't. He's like, I just don't think this is it. And she said, test me anyway. It's just a simple blood test. And she was finally at her wit's end. She said, test me for it, and if it comes back normal, I will take the antipsychotic medications. It came back, and her thyroid was way over. So much so that she was in
hyperdrive.
It could have been fatal. It could have been fatal.
Well, if the visions and stuff were getting worse, then
Well, it was also autoimmune. The doctor told her that if she had a sore throat or the sniffles, go immediately to the ER. It could be your body starting to shut down.
Oh wow.
But so they diagnosed her with Graves' disease, which is very rare, and they gave her medication to help bring her levels down, and within a month, her hallucinations were completely gone.
That's amazing that it was.
Isn't that crazy?
It was all related to her thyroid, not a mental disorder.
Yeah, and how terrifying are these things that she was seeing?
I've known people that had Graves' disease, but not to that extreme. In fact, Barbara Bush, President Bush's wife, had Graves' disease. You'll remember back.
I do remember. President. I think. No, okay. Was that one of the reasons why her eyes?
Her eyes bulge. Yeah.
Right,
When people, my mother had it as well, and your eyes tend to bulge a little bit. When you have it, but I've never heard it causing those kind of symptoms before. That's really amazing.
Yeah. So good for Sarah though that she
Absolutely.
figured that out.
That's awesome. I'm remembering the people that I worked with at the state hospital, the patients there that, they really had trouble with the hallucinations that seemed so real to them. Either what they were hearing or what they were seeing. So you just really feel for those folks. Well, now here's a really encouraging story. I think this is I couldn't wait for us to start recording today so we could tell this one about a fellow named Scott Routley, Routley. Some of this also came from a BBC article. called about him. And in the year 2000, 27-year-old Canadian man named Scott Routley was in a serious car accident. Both sides of his brain were injured, and he was completely unresponsive. Though his parents believed that he was conscious and could communicate by lifting a thumb or moving his eyes, the medical staff wrote this off as wishful thinking. Clinically, Scott was completely comatose. Doctors assumed that he was lost in limbo. But they were wrong. 12 years went by. In 2012, a professor named Adrian Owen and his postdoctoral fellow Lorena Nasia of the University of Western Ontario, which is located in London, Ontario, decided to run tests on comatose patients like Scott Routley. They were curious if some, quote, vegetative patients might have some level of consciousness. Owen, who had previously been a neurologist at Cambridge University in England, decided to put Scott in an MRI, and he told him to imagine walking through his home. Amazingly, the brain scan showed activity. Scott not only heard Owen's question, but he was also responding.
Cool.
Then Professor Owen asked Scott to imagine that he was playing tennis. A notably different part of Scott's brain began firing, and it was very detectable on the scan. The two areas of activity were so distinct that Owen realized he could work out a code of sorts with Scott. He said, "Scott, I'm going to ask you some yes or no questions. If the answer to the question is yes, then I want you to think about walking through your home. If it is no, then I want you to think about playing tennis." You see, he could tell what he was thinking by looking at the scan and see which area of his brain fired up. Owen began with a simple question. Is the sky blue? Scott thought about walking through his home. Is the moon green? Scott thought about playing tennis. As exciting as all this was to researchers and the medical staff, Owen made history when he asked Scott the following question. Scott, are you in any kind of pain? Scott thought about playing tennis. This was the first time that anyone in a vegetative state has ever been able to report on their condition.
Oh, wow.
Really was quite a breakthrough. Since that first experience in 2012, Scott and Professor Owen have continued to discover ways that they can communicate. Now Scott only has to think yes or no, and Professor Owen can detect his answers on the MRI scan.
So that's interesting to me.
Awesome.
Like, did Professor Owen get better at it?
I think more detailed,
with the MRI, or did Scott get better at it?
I don't know. I think reading what he was, the part of his brain that fired up when he thinks yes, as opposed to thinking no, was they became better at that. Obviously, the implications of Professor Owen's work are huge.
Absolutely.
This breakthrough may allow other coma patients a path to communicate with doctors, clinicians, and even family members. In fact, the article quoted another patient that had been visited by his sister who had recently had a baby. And they asked the patient, does your sister have a baby? And he was able to answer yes. He knew that she had a baby.
Oh, that's amazing.
Right. Just by thinking yes, or by thinking about whatever indicated yes.
So now I'm picturing like miniature MRI.
Right.
You know?
Over your head. There's something right. You can think one thing or the other. Scott Routley is still trapped in his body, but he finally has a way to reach out to the people around him.
Very
you can imagine
cool.
After 12 years. So, the people that are in coma situations often are aware of what's going on around them. They just can't respond.
Oh, I can't imagine. That would just, Okay, so this next one is deliciously weird. There's this well-documented phenomenon that is, and I need to say that this comes from scientificamerican.com as well as Wikipedia. This well-documented phenomenon that is commonly experienced by people under extreme physical duress. It's called third man or sensed presence syndrome. Simply put, it's where an overly taxed person will feel another presence there beside them, and it's usually a comforting feeling. Not always, but usually a comforting, supportive feeling. So the term third man comes from the T.S. Eliot poem, The Wasteland. Who is this third who always walks beside you? When I count, there are only you and I together. But when I look up ahead at the white road, there is always another one walking beside you. Elliot was inspired by explorer Ernest Shackleton's account of his traumatic Antarctic expedition. Quote, that the party of explorers at the extremity of their strength had the constant delusion that there was one more member than we could actually count. So lone sailors, mountain climbers, and ultra-endurance athletes have all reported on the phenomenon. Anyone who is subject to extremes of monotony, long-term darkness, isolation, extreme cold, dehydration, or even sleep deprivation is prone to experience third man syndrome. Charles Lindbergh, listen to this, he said of his transatlantic flight to Paris, quote, the fuselage behind me becomes filled with ghostly presences, vaguely outlined forms, transparent, moving, riding weightless with me in the plane, conversing and advising on my flight, discussing problems of my navigation, reassuring me, giving me messages of importance unattainable in ordinary life.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, and you wonder, I mean, is this just because you're so alone for so long that it seems like some of your thoughts are outside and physical or whatever? But scientists have speculated that reported sightings of ghosts or encounters with aliens could possibly be chalked up to the third man syndrome, which they feel is made up entirely within the brain itself. In fact, modern psychologists have actually used this third man syndrome or third man factor to treat victims of trauma. They use this cultivated inner character to lend the patient imagined support and comfort.
Interesting. You got somebody with you. Great. Well, we have one final article to talk about here, and I love this one.
Yep, this is a good one. I like the name.
This one comes to us from openculture.com, and we have the amazing story of Mel Blanc. Now, you may or may not have heard that name before, but I guarantee that you have heard his voice. Mel Blanc began as a radio performer in Portland, Oregon in the 1930s. He was noted for his ability to mimic hundreds of voices. His talent was noticed by the great comedian Jack Benny, who brought Mel to Hollywood to be a part of his network radio comedy show. He played various roles on the show, including the sound effect for Benny's notoriously cantankerous old car, which was 1914 Maxwell. It made all kind of gasping noises and everything. While in Hollywood, Mel also began working for Warner Brothers Studios as the voice of a new cartoon character named Bugs Bunny.
What's up, Doc?
Yeah. Bugs Bunny. Over the next 2 decades, Mel Blanc became the voice of nearly every Warner Brothers character. Porky Pig, Daffy Duck, Tweety, Sylvester, Elmer Fudd, Yosemite Sam, Foghorn Leghorn. I've known so many people like Foghorn Leghorn.
That's one of my favorites.
One of my know-it-all. And dozens of others. In fact, he was documented as being able to do more than 400 different voices. In the 1950s, Jack Benny moved his show to television from radio, and Blanc's talents were given a new opportunity to shine. Now, if you've never seen the Jack Benny Mel Blanc See-Sigh sketch, it's hilarious. I show it to my students, and it stands up to this day.
Maybe we'll put a link.
We'll put a link on it on our Facebook page. It really is great. Well, anyway, in 1961, Blanc was in a head-on collision on Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles. He was driving a small, sporty Aston Martin. The other car was an Oldsmobile Delta 88, a massive car.
No contest.
When emergency responders arrived, Blanc was unconscious. He actually had to be cut out of the car. He was transported to the hospital, but not given much of a chance to live. In fact, the doctor said 1,000 to 1 chance that he'll live.
Wow.
But he did live. For 14 days, though, he was completely unresponsive. His wife and his son came to see him every day. They talked to him and tried to get him to respond, but nothing. Then one day, as his family was in the room, one of the doctors came in. The doctor noticed one of the get well cards on the bedside table had a picture of Bugs Bunny on it, and then the doctor got an idea. Bugs Bunny, how are you doing today? There was a pause, but then in a weak voice that anyone would recognize, yeah, what's up, Doc? The doctor then asked Tweety if he was there too. I thought I saw a putty tat, was the reply. While Mel's wife and son were standing there watching in amazement, the doctor went through 6 different characters, and each time Mel answered in that character's voice.
Oh, wow.
Later that afternoon, Blank slowly began to wake up from the coma. "Where am I? What happened?" he asked. He was explained, "You were in a car accident. You're in the hospital." It took 7 months and a body cast before Mel Blanc fully recovered. In fact, he even recorded Barney Rubble's voice from the Flintstones while he was lying flat on his back with a microphone hanging over his bed. Remarkably, he had no memory.
Must go on.
Yeah, right. He had no memory of answering the doctor's questions with the characters' voices. But until he died in 1989, he claimed that Bugs Bunny had saved his life. The website that this came from actually had a voice recording of Mel Blanc's son, Noel, who was in the room and described seeing it at the time.
Oh, wow.
So what are we to make of this? Well, according to his son, Noel, his father was deeply connected to his characters. He said, "I could watch him through the window of the soundproof booth when he was recording, and I could always tell which character he was doing just by the expression on his face, even though I couldn't hear him." His doctors surmise that deep within his subconscious, the part of Mel's brain where his many voices were stored was simply waiting for its cue. Throughout his career, Mel was constantly waiting for the word action before he began voicing the characters, and it was automatic. He didn't even have to think about it. It just came about so normally and naturally to him. So when the doctor spoke to Bugs Bunny, that part of his brain elicited an automatic response. The brain activity then helped trigger his recovery from the coma. Really fascinating story. Mel Blanc died in 1989. His last words to his son were in Yosemite Sam's voice, "You know, I love you." And I like the inscription on his tombstone. That's all, folks.
And now it's time, boys and girls, for the Trivia Challenge.
So we have an answer to our Trivia Challenge question.
What?
From our episode on
Somebody
Monumental
got one?
Oddities, the U.S. version.
That's about time someone answered one.
That's true. We've kind of had a dry spell. So the question was, and it came from Harbin Gould. Thank you, Harbin. What monument was held hostage, by whom, and why? The answer is, for 10 hours on December 1982, the Washington Monument and 8 tourists were held hostage by a nuclear arms protester, Norman Meyer, claiming to have explosives in a van he drove to the monument's base.
Oh, I vaguely remember that.
Yeah, it didn't end well for Norman.
Imagine that.
Yeah, so the answer was correctly given by one of our new listeners, Amy McMahon.
Good job, Amy.
Yes,
Nicely
good
done,
job,
Amy.
Amy and I bonded over social media when I found out that she gives audio tours for travelers. Even travelers that have to stay home due to, like, you know, a pandemic or what have you.
Oh, psh.
So you can tour parts of London from the comfort of your own home. Check out our website at tourguideguides.com. And thank you, Amy, for being a listener.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Amy. Well, you know the rules for our trivia challenge. This is always exciting. Like and follow our Facebook page at Remnant Stew Podcast. Like and share this episode post. Put your answer to the trivia challenge question in a comment on that post. The first person to do all that will be the winner and will be mentioned in an upcoming episode of Remnant Stew.
We might send you a free brain surgery.
How about that?
Or
A chunk of
piece
Einstein's
a
brain, a
Yeah, a
little
chunk
cube.
of brain. Okay, so I'm looking at a picture of a small little statue of a naked little man with distorted features. His hands and face are huge compared with the rest of his body, and his tongue is protruding. Tell me the name of this statue and what he has to do with the brain. Remnant Stew is created by me, Leah Lamp. Dr. Judy Meeker and I research, write, and host each episode. Audio is produced by Philip Sinquefield. Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod with voiceover by Morgan Hughes. Special thanks to Judy Meeker and Harbin Gould. You can connect with us through our Facebook and Instagram, and if you have an idea that you'd like to hear us cover in a future episode, you can always email us suggestions
Oh, please do. We
at
love your suggestions.
staycurious@remnantstew.com.
That's right.
Now, before you go, please hit the subscribe button so you won't miss an episode. Head over to iTunes and leave us a review. It means the world to us. Share Remnant Stew with your friends, family, your therapist, and your favorite professor. Until next time, remember to choose to be kind and always stay curious.